So good afternoon, everyone. I am Myla Turner. I am a social science data and research librarian. And more importantly, I am a longtime user of SPSS, which is the statistical package for the social sciences. And that is what I'm going to introduce today and provide a little bit of an overview. Just to give you a quick background about me. I'm a sociologist, and so I got my start using SPSS when I was in your position in school working on my honors thesis. I want to say maybe my junior year. So working with one of my favorite professors to conduct research. When I joined a project that was already ongoing, they had collected hundreds of surveys on paper with the New Orleans Police Department after Hurricane Katrina to learn about their experiences and how they perform their duties or not. So my very first task was to enter data from these surveys, not in SPSS, but into Excel. And then from Excel, we imported that data into SPSS. And then I learned SPSS by exploring it through that project. And so way back then, I want to say that was probably SPSS 14 or 15. Now they are already up to version 29. But today I think we're going to be working in version 27. So we can go ahead and jump into what we're going to talk about today, which is to introduce SPSS, some basics of the files and how they work, how to enter data, how to modify data, and how to do some exploratory data analysis or basic statistical analysis, and also thinking about cleaning the data that we use in SPSS. Okay, so if you're here, perhaps you are curious about using SPSS, and I want to just quickly go over some of the features and the benefits and why it's preferred, not just in the social sciences, but maybe in a few other fields as well. So what is it? I already told you it is the statistical package for the social sciences, but it's a complete integrated package that gives you everything you need from data entry to the analysis to the management to even the visualization if you're thinking about the deliverables for your project. And so there are a few different ways to use it. It is pretty, I think it's pretty intuitive and easy to use because you can use drop-down menus and point and click for any kind of analysis or transformation or what you want to perform. But it also has syntax. So you can learn the SPSS programming language, learn the syntax, and from what I hear, it's even easier to put your commands, perform your analysis through those syntax commands. What else? There are lots of statistical tools included. Everything that you would typically use for everything I would typically use, from the descriptive stats, the frequencies, the regression, correlation. So all of the big ones that you're probably learning about in your classes, and then even other tools, statistical tools that I haven't explored yet. And so just thinking about, I mentioned that I imported data sets from Excel. Now in Qualtrics, you can export your data into an SPSS file format. It can read other types of files, text files and other formats, and even from other statistical software packages. So it is a pretty nifty, very useful, very versatile software. And I already mentioned that, you can do a lot of things within it. It can handle a lot of several data types, but mostly we use it for quantitative data analysis. I would say this is where the limitations would be. It's not going to be your everything software. If you're using qualitative data and you have lengthy open-ended responses, then you would want to use qualitative software like in Vivo or MaxQDA, but for your quantitative data needs, SPSS will work really well. So I'm going to get into the numeric and string variables a little bit later. And then I already mentioned some of the visualization options that you have in SPSS. So we can just move forward for now. And you will receive these slides after the workshop. So I'm going to be moving pretty quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but you'll have these slides. So even the stuff that I don't cover, you can read and see. And then I'm also including several links to learning resources for you that are published by maybe different educational institutions, IBM, SPSS itself, and then even some files, books that we have at FSU libraries. Okay, so on the wonders of SPSS, a few more. I'm going to skip them because I mostly covered these things, but the most important thing to know is that it's got a lot of functionality just as it is, but then users have been able to extend it to make it even more functional with libraries in R and Python and also the SPSS syntax. So there are a lot of things you can do and a lot of ways to use it. So how to access SPSS? There are a few options. While I'm going to access it through option 2, which is my FSU VLab. Generally, it is in the FSU software store. And then also it is on some desktops in the libraries, in Dirac and in Strozier. But now that the Scholars Commons lab is not currently open, I would say our best option now is going to be option 2. And that's the option that I'm going to show you before I jump to access. We'll do that together. And at that point, you can sign in, you can follow along with what I'm doing. I just want to give a quick note about the files and the windows that you'll see, because it could be a little overwhelming if it's your first time opening SPSS and you say, what is this, all this stuff that pops up? So there are a few different unique SPSS files, and you can look at the file name extensions to know what they are. So primarily, we're going to be working with the data editor window, and I'll show you that in just a moment, but that's the one, that's the .sav file, and it's usually indicated by that red plus sign, which you can see in the top left corner of the window. It tells you kind of color codes and tells you what it is that you're looking at. So first is the data editor file, and we're going to do most of our work in that today. And then when we do ask for output, when we ask for it to run some statistics, that comes in the output window, and we can save that output, and that will be a .spv file. Okay, so at some point that file will open too. And then if you want to write in syntax, if you want to use the SPSS syntax, there is a separate window for that. And and you can save that syntax that you have written as a .sps file. I don't think we are going to work with the syntax editor today. We're going to be focused on the data editor and then the output window. But just so you know what these different file types are, because when you go to, let's say you want to work with sample files, they have sample files of all types. Most of the sample files are the .sav files for the data, but there are other types as well if you want to explore them. And then when you're looking at different extensions, then you can pay attention. If you know you want these syntax, then you know you're looking for the .sps files. So pay attention to those file extension names because it makes a difference how you're saving and where you're saving and what it is that you're saving for your research. Okay, now this is the point I'm going to stop sharing here and go through the VLab to open the SPSS. So let me go back to sharing my screen. And I'm going to add this link in the chat as well, in case anybody needs to get to the VLab to follow along. Okay. So here is my FSU VLab. I'm going to sign in, go through the gateway, and I have to go through a Duo verification. Okay. So now I'm in my FSU VLab. And so you see that I've already got my favorites on the homepage, just based on what I use. And I'm going to go to IBM SPSS Statistics 27. And just to note that that SPSS, these versions are forward and backward compatible. So even though we are using version 27 right now, I'm not sure what version is on the desktops in the libraries, or what version will be available through the software store, but it won't be an issue either way because these files will be compatible. Okay, so it's opening, it's starting IBM SPSS. And if you've never used the VLab before, it opens software right in the window, the browser window. Now, as many times as I've done this, I don't know why it takes so long today. Okay, so it has some stuff auto recovered when I was just looking at things earlier and didn't want to save it. But let me go full screen here. You might be able to see it better. Okay. And all right, making sure you can see the full screen. So today we're working with sample files. So you see a couple tabs across the bottom. Usually you won't see this first one, restore points, unless you closed SPSS without saving what you were doing, which is exactly what I did earlier, because I didn't want to save it. Normally you'll just see these two, recent files and sample files. Today we are going to be working with sample files. One really great thing about using SPSS, there are lots of documentation, lots of tutorials, and lots of sample files. And so we see lots and lots of sample files here. The one that I want to work with, which is best for demonstrative purposes like we're doing today, it's called survey_sample. And it is a .sav file, which tells me that's the data file that's going to open in the data editor. And so I'm choosing survey sample. And I'm going to say open and give it the opportunity to load. Okay, so it has loaded the data. Mm-hmm. Open. Here we go. So we've got the data open, the data editor open. And so what we're going to do from here is first, I want to explore a little bit. So this time, one window open, you see the output editor, and behind it, the output in front, and behind it is the data editor. I'm going to make it a little larger so that we can kind of explore it. And so what we're looking at here is by default, we come into the data view, and then you see these tabs at the bottom. We also have a variable view. But let me tell you what you're looking at first. So this is the data set. And so here, one variable is in each column. Okay. So ID for like the ID of the respondent. And then, these other variables. So one variable in each column, and then going across, so the rows is each participant. So if you were entering data, you would set up your data editor in such a way that you would tell it across the columns which variables, and then you would go across and enter the data for each participant. For example, if you had like a paper survey, you had to go from the paper to online. Many surveys now, since they started as online surveys, you can just import the data. If you're importing, be sure that wherever you're importing from, the variables are labeled. So each of your columns has labels, and that'll help when you import it. Now, what are these variables? We can explore those a little bit more, and also what these little symbols mean. So if we switch from data view to variable view, we have all of the info that we might want about our variables. Okay, so now this switch, we've got the variable names in the column. So usually the first one is some sort of ID, like the number of the participant or the or the unique identifier for that survey or for that response. And then it's going to tell me a few things about each of these variables. So what type of data is this? It is numeric data. What type of, what width the data. So width is in, let me go back to the data view. So for something like age, which was pretty clear what it is, you see that the first one, the person's age is 60, and that's two digits, 60. So that width would be 2, but it's saying the width could be up to 4 digits for this variable. And depending on what kind of data you're looking at, you may or may not want decimals. I don't want to look at any decimals, so I've got all of the decimals set to 0 decimal places. Easy to change if you wanted to change it. And then the label. So the label, actually, if I go back to the name is should be short. You only have, I think, 8 characters to put in a name. It should be short, but it should be intuitive. Like you see, this has to be an abbreviation. So work status, okay, WRKSTAT, work stat. But then when you come to your label, it should also be brief, but you have a few more words to put in a more descriptive label for what that variable is. Labor force status, okay? Same thing for here. And I should go ahead and note that capitalization does not matter to SPSS, whether you're writing the syntax or creating your variables. So they could be all capital letters, they could be all lowercase. It's not going to matter either way. So you've got the variable name, it's got to be short, something easy to identify, but then you can add a label to tell you more about what that variable is. And then what are the potential values for that variable? So we can take a look at this one, marital status. And when I open up to look at the values, if I was looking in the data editor, I would only see, numbers, the numerics, and I wouldn't know what that means. But I've got values to tell me that, okay, 1 is married, 2 is widowed, and so on and so on. So we can label those values, those variable values, when it is not, just an intuitive thing. The next column is for missing data. You tell SPSS how you want it to treat missing data. Do you want it to, how does it read the missing data? So you could use, like in this case, 0, 98, 99 are the values for missing data. You could be using negative 98, negative 99, 0, or leaving a space blank to indicate that it is missing data. So you get to decide how missing data is treated in SPSS. So that's like a user defined value. And then columns is a width, like width is a width. It's not the same width, but it is the width of each column in the data view. We don't really need to know that. And then alignment, that's exactly what it sounds like, how it's aligned in the column. I've seen some where, maybe the first one, the ID is left aligned and the others are right aligned. It doesn't really matter, but you can see the difference here since I just made that change. Now this column, they're all aligned to the left, while everything else you see is aligned all the way to the right. Okay, and then measure. So this is one that one that is more useful because the measurement of the variable indicates what kind of statistics you can perform. So in SPSS, you only have 3 options: nominal, which is like the three circles, ordinal, which looks like a little bar chart, and scale. And if you are used to levels of measurement like nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio, interval and ratio are both considered scale variables in SPSS. So we've got nominal, ordinal, and then scale to indicate interval and ratio. And then the roll column, you don't really need that until you get to the analysis, because it talks about, which variable is going to be maybe the independent or the dependent. For now, we just want to be sure that the data that we import is clean. Our data, I would say our code, our variables clean. So this is why we would look for the variable view to be sure that everything is set the way we want it. And this is one way to start the process of cleaning the data. So once we know what's in here, we'll know, okay, well, this needs to be fixed, or this needs to be aligned. I don't want decimal points. These labels need to be changed, or I've got to transform some variables. So we'll get back to some of those things in a moment. Let's say we saw something was on the wrong scale. We could change the variable type and tell it that, we want it to be measured in a different way. We could also, I said before that I would talk about numeric and string. Most of your data will either be a numeric variable, which exactly what it sounds like, or a string variable, which can include letters. So our string variables could also include numbers, but once it includes letters, of course, you're not going to be able to perform mathematical functions on them the same way that you could numerics. All right. I am going to pause for a second, see if there are any initial questions, and then we're going to start doing some exploratory data analysis. And that'll tell us, if there's anything that needs to be recoded or transformed, or maybe we want to change some of these variable labels. So are there any questions at this point? Getting access to SPSS through the B Lab, or opening the sample data, the survey sample file, or just what any of the things mean in the variable view, or understanding the data view? If you want to open the data file, like the one I'm looking at, to explore, when you first open SPSS, a window will pop up asking you what file you want to open. Look for the tabs toward the bottom. One says recent files, one says sample files. Recent files or sample files. Go to sample files and then scroll down till you find the one that says survey_sample. You can really go to any of those sample files to play with and explore, but some are better than others. So the one that I've chosen is the survey sample file, and I've chosen this one for a particular reason. I mentioned that I'm coming from a sociological background, and so the data that I typically use is I'll be interested in people, products, or prices. So this survey sample file, demographic data, data on various attitudes. It comes from the General Social Survey, old version of it, maybe going General Social Surveys in 1972. This data comes from the 19. So added some fictitious variables, Okay, so I see a question about changing the numeric variable to a string variable, and then one about specific measures. Okay, so let me say a bit about these specific measures. So level of measurement, hopefully you have been introduced to that in a statistics course that kind of helps you determine like, okay, what is nominal, what is ordinal, and what is interval ratio. And so with the data that I have on the screen, I can show you an example. This variable for marital status, so it says it's at the nominal level. And so the nominal level is, I like to think of it as maybe like the lowest level, not low like a judgment, but more like, you know, they're just names for things. There might be categories, but there is no order to it. Like marital status, when I look at these values, there is really no way to put them in order. I might have a moral idea about, you know, which ranks best or whatever. But in reality, there is no inherent order to these things. Okay. And that's how nominal variables are. If I asked you, you know, what is your favorite type of pet? And response options are cat, dog, fish, snake. You might think dogs are the best, but in reality, there is no way to really rank them in a really true sense. So that's what nominal variables are. You would have nominal variables when the response is like a category, like marital status, like race, like where you went to school, what your major is. If that was a question, that's, you know, that would be like a nominal variable. Versus an ordinal variable, ordinal, keyword, well, key root word, order. And so ordinal variables, they do have an inherent order to them, a natural order. Like degree, when we look at degrees, we know that less than high school, junior college, bachelor's degree, graduate degree, there's an order to that. And it's a natural order that you can be ordered from low to high. And so that would be an ordinal variable. And then the scale variables are the interval ratio variables. Those are the ones that they do have an order, but more than an order, they form a numeric scale. So age is probably the best example. Well, maybe not to show you here because it'd be a very long range, but let's say number of children. Okay. You can put in it's not the best one to look at, but let's say, yeah, okay. How many grandparents wrong one. How many grandparents born outside the US? Now that one I would probably change. If I were to open, let's see, age, all it really defines is don't know and then not available. But age would be one of those things because it has an order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a natural order, but also it forms like a numeric scale. If the question number of children, if you put in the data, you know, from 0 to, in this case, 8, that actually corresponds to the a natural occurring order, and then the attributes actually mean something. So those are the 1, 2, 3 types, and then all of these are listed as numeric because if you think about something like this variable gender, while gender is a nominal variable, and here it's only measuring male or female, which is actually sex. So it's only measuring these 2 things, but when the data is entered, it was entered as 1s for males and 2s for females. And so that's why it's called a numeric variable. Okay, so when I go back to the data view and look at all of these things together, all I'm seeing in here is numerics, and that corresponds here, but I've already told it what the values of these numerics are. So these are the labels that I'm going to use. Okay, so we're going to jump to some exploratory data analysis. So in your case, a realistic case scenario. You have either entered data into SPSS or you have imported data into SPSS. And because it is primary data, maybe it's primary data, but especially if it's primary data, you want to kind of explore to kind of perform a few checks to see that, okay, what you have imported or what you have entered is actually what you intended. And so this is like one of the first steps to cleaning the data. And so what I'm going to do is in this data editor view, I can actually do it from the variable view. I could even do it from the output, but I'm going to start here in the data view. So there are, I want to say over 800, thousands of responses here. Way too many for me to try to eyeball and check and go across each row and down each column to figure out if I have put everything in the way that I intended. So instead, what I'm going to do is go to my menu. So if you learn the syntax, you can type a syntax code for this. For our purposes here, the introduction, we're going to use this drop-down menu. So I'm going to analyze and then descriptive statistics. Okay. And then they give me a few options for frequencies, descriptives, explore. Explore can be fun. Frequencies can be fun to get the tables, but I want descriptives specifically. And I'm going to start with my scale variables. And then I'm going to, depending on how we are on time, I might do all the way down to nominal. So starting with the scale variables, respondent ID, I know that's nothing but an ID for what they are. I'm going to instead choose some of these. So when you get this pop-up box, you pull or you tell it which variables that you want to perform the analysis on by selecting them and putting them over in the variable box. That's exactly what I'm going to do, but I want multiple variables. I want all of these. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and highlight all of them and then put them, make sure they move over to the right side for the variables. I'm going to go to options to be sure I'm getting what I want. And so the default option is good. Yes, I want the mean. Yes, I want the minimum, the maximum, the standard deviation, but I also want to know about skewness. So I'm going to check that one. And then, the variable order is fine. So I'll go to continue here. If you were to choose the paste button, it would paste the syntax for you. Okay. But I want to go ahead and run it. So I'm going to say, okay. All right. And I just want to be sure that that window popped up is visible for you. Okay, good. So let's see. I've run my very first descriptive statistics. So this is where you can begin the data cleaning process and kind of see what you've got. And I've only chosen a few variables, but however many you've got, you can explore. So this first one, number of children. So the first column you get is the N, which is N for number. And so I've got the number of people who have answered this question. Okay. Answered each of these questions. So you see these numbers have differed. And then for this bottom, valid N list-wise. So the valid number list-wise are the number of people for all of these variables who have answered each of these questions. So you see that for the number of children, I've got 2,825 people who answered that. But when I look all the way at the bottom, the number of people I have that answered every question is only 955. Okay, so the different variables have different numbers of data missing, but depending on what type of analysis I want to perform and how I'm dealing with missing data. So am I just throwing out the missing data? Am I telling SPSS to use that variable's mean in place of in place of the missing data? That is a decision that you have to make later. But this is what this first column is. So the N, the number of responses for each of these variables. Minimum statistic is exactly what it sounds like. So for the number of children, the minimum number of children a person can have is 0. And for this survey, the maximum number is 8, but not quite 8, because you saw just now that anything over 8 was all coded together with 8. Okay, so 8 doesn't truly mean 8 in this case, but when you know your data, you know what's included and what's not included. Okay. The mean statistic, the mean, like how we think about a numerical average, mean. So the mean number of children that people surveyed have is 1.82. Okay, that makes sense. All right. The standard deviation statistic is here, the 1.69. And then in the right, well, not the rightmost, but the skewness statistic, I'm looking, to see how skewed it is. I'm looking for my stats to fall between 1 and -1. And so when I see something outside of that, I say, okay, it's a little skewed. Maybe this is something I want to explore further. And skewness, that refers to like having a normal distribution, like a normal bell curve distribution that's even on both sides. If not, then it could be skewed to the right or skewed to the left. And this column is going to tell me, okay, this is going to be skewed. I need to explore this a little bit further. And so, you can just kind of look at these descriptive statistics to see what makes sense. If we go to the second one, age of respondent, minimum age 18. Does that make sense to me? Yeah, because I didn't want to do my survey with anyone younger than 18 years old. So this is the minimum age that I should see. If I saw 13 in this column, that would let me know that either a mistake has been made entering the data, or maybe a 13-year-old accidentally took my survey. I don't know how that happened, but I'm going to throw that one out completely. Or, more likely, I just made an error typing, and I can go back, I can pull whatever number survey that was, and then verify that, where I put 13, it should have actually been 18. And then that's another way you can check and clean the data. 89. So you're looking for things that should not be characteristic for what it is that you're studying. For example, for this first one, number of children, if I had a number here like 32, while it is possible for someone to have 32 children, it's also not likely that they would participate in my survey. So that would tell me I need to go back and check this. Okay. So this is what we're looking for with these descriptive statistics. We're just kind of exploring, seeing what's here. It's going to let us know if there are any outliers. For example, if someone, one, it wouldn't be captured because any more than 8 would be all classified as 8. But let's say for age of respondent, if it tells me here that someone is 132 years old, I would say, okay, that is strange. That's an outlier. Perhaps I was typing 32 and accidentally put that 1 in front of it, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull that survey and I'm going to see like, is this person actually 132 years old? If so, that is an outlier in my data. And I need to know where those outliers are, what those outliers are. And if not, and it was just an error, then I can go ahead and fix it. So that's one of the values of, go ahead and exploring your data through the descriptives, and then you get a sense of how much data is missing, if they're falling in the correct range, and then what the averages are, just to see, if there is some normality here that impacts what assumptions you make, thinking about what type of statistical analyses you perform later. Okay. Questions on this initial output. I'm going to go back to the variable view, and I'm going to talk about changing or recoding variables, because this is something that you might be likely to do. Now, after you have imported or entered your data, you got your full data set here. Of course, you want to save that .sav file. And then after you clean the data, you want to save that file, that SAV file. And so you always want to have your original pure data set somewhere before you start tinkering and tweaking things. All right. So be sure that you have saved, that you save what you're doing before you start creating and recoding and changing too many things. Okay. So first, something that you might be likely to do is recoding variables. And I'm going back to this variable view. Let's say something like income. All right. Total family income. Let me see how that's measured. Total family income. So 0 means they didn't provide any response. 1 is less than $1,000. Then I've got range from all the way to 12. I see the 13 is for refuse. 98, 99, 98 is don't know, 99 is NA. And I'm going to make a note. So the actual, so I have between 1 and 12. And I should note about the General Social Survey, because they do this every year with a sample of the population, they distribute different surveys. So not every person gets asked every question. And knowing that we've got this NA here that they didn't answer, this first 0, the NAP, I believe that they were not provided that question to begin with. So I'm interested in between 1 and 12. Okay, so just to look and see what's here, I'm going to go to transform, recode into different variables. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is creating a new variable from this variable that exists. All right, I'm going to, so the box opens, I'm going to find, okay, well, first, this is showing me the label names. I rather see the variable names. So I just right click and then switch it to variable names. And that's going to help me easily find the one that I'm looking for, income. Okay, so I've got an income variable or variable named income, and I'm going to recode, rather than having all those 12 categories, I just want 3. Low income, middle income, high income. And so I'm going to recode all of the data about, where they fall, or how much money they make into these new variables. So I'm going to call this income cat for categories. In my label, income grouped into 3 categories. So the label name has got to be short. The variable name, it can't have any spaces or any special characters. Case doesn't matter, but I think it can only be like a length of 10. So income cat, then my label is a little bit more descriptive, also short. And I am going to tell it what I want my new values to be. So first, I should have written down exactly what they were, but I'm going to say between 1 and 4. I don't remember the exact numbers, but for anybody who gave a response that was coded 1, 2, 3, or 4, I want them all to be recoded into a new variable with the value. I'm going to call this, the value is going to be 1. And I know that between 1 and 4 are all going to be 1. That means it's going to be O. And then between 5 and 8, I'm going to recode those as 2. And then 9 through 12, I'm going to 3. Okay. So what I'm doing is telling it, anybody, I know the 1 was less than $1,000. I don't know exactly what those other, the lowest 4 categories. If somebody answered, or if it was entered 1, 2, 3, or 4, they're all going to become 1 for my new variable. 5 through 8 are all going to become 2 for middle. And 9 through 12 will all become 3s or high income. So I'm going to continue here. And see, I hit click change for this new one, then hit OK. All right, and then the output just opened to tell me what it is that they did. So this is the syntax for what just happened. And I forgot to point this out the first time around. When we did the drop-down menu, we told it what descriptive statistics perform. But then once you get to the output, you see it's telling you what it did, and it's writing it in the SPSS syntax. Same thing for recoding those variables. Now, when I go back to my data view, if I scroll data view is here. If I go all the way over to the end of the data view, I'll see the new variable that I created at the end. And just like in variable view, if I were to scroll all the way to the end, it'll be at the bottom here. Okay. So here, and then I know I need to tell it what those values are. So value 1 will be low income, 2, middle income, 3, high income. All right, I've got that in there and we can actually check it out. So I'm going to go to analyze, descriptive statistics, frequencies, and I'm going to find my variable. I'm going to change it to variable names. I'm going to scroll all the way to the end for income cat. That's my income categories. If I were to switch over to variable view, it tells it exactly what I said it was, income grouped into 3 categories. That's the one I want. I wanted to display frequency tables, but let's see, do I want any other statistics? Yeah, let's go ahead and, I mean, it says, mean is not going to mean much because I only have those 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. But for another variable, maybe it makes sense. Then I already know the minimum and maximum, so I don't need those. Standard deviation, if you want these things. But for now, let's just see mean, median, mode. And then I'm going to hit OK. And then I can look at the output here. So low income, well, I guess I should compare it. Let me add one more. I'm going to add one more for the original variable so we can compare the original to the new variable. Okay. All right. So for the original variable, these were the categories from less than $1,000 to $25,000 or more. And now that I'm seeing this again, I would really have to think about why I called this high income or middle income, because really all of these would be low income, and by today's standards. So from having each one of these variables, and I can see how many people fell into each of these ranges, like 33 people that made between $6,000 and $6,999. But what I did to recode that variable, my new variable, so the 1, 2, 3, 4 all became low income. And so if I were to add these up, the 36, 32, 24, 32 should equal 124 for low income. And then the next 4 middle income, and then the last 4 falling into the high income group. And then, and so that's my new variable. So I don't know why I would want to change from, let's see, this variable to this ordinal variable. Okay, so it's a little more than nominal. It is ordinal because there's an order, low, middle, high. But in reality, it's not something that you would do. You could do something more specific if instead I wanted to group, let's say, these 4 into, instead of less than 1,000, I wanted all of these to be less than $5,000, then I can recode that into a new variable. Between $5,001 to $9,999 or less than 10,000. So maybe that would be a more realistic way to do so. So that's how you transform your variables. Let me pause here for questions. Also, I'm looking at the time. What questions do you have about getting up and running in SPSS, getting your data into SPSS, cleaning your data, exploring your data, transforming variables. It really is intuitive for what things that you want to do, changing the variable names, changing the variable types, recoding. And again, I promise you, there are lots of tutorials and stats and stuff. Sorry, not stats, tutorials and videos and help. So what questions do you have now about getting started with SPSS? All right, I'm not seeing or hearing any questions. I'm going to go back and show you a few more things in the data editor. Okay, so really for the drop-down menus, like I said, you can perform, or you can ask it to perform those statistics from the output, from the data editor, from either view. But just a little note about these things. So drop-down menus, awesome. That's the intuitive part. Very easily go and see what you want to do. So you got descriptive statistics that allows you to explore and describe. This is where you get your frequencies and your summaries. The last thing we did was the frequencies because we wanted to know how many people responded to each category of income. So we get the frequencies for each response option of that variable. The first thing we did was the descriptives that we looked at the minimum, the maximum, the mean, the standard deviation, the skewness. Okay, so these are all tools that you can use to explore and figure out what it is that what your data look like. Cross tabulation is another one that you could use that we probably use kind of often. Beyond that, we've got a list of options to compare means. So this is where you're going to find your t-test and ANOVA, analysis variance. All right, you can find those here and compare means. Another big one is going to be correlate. So if you're testing the relationship between variables, you want to know the strength of the relationship, if there's a relationship, and the direction of the relationship. You go to correlate. Okay, so this is where you're going to find Pearson's and Spearman-Rowe and all of the correlation statistics, additional correlation statistics. That's going to depend on how you measured your variables, which ones that you want to use. And one of the resources I'm going to pass along for you is like a when to use what variable, when to use what statistical test, when to use what. And then another big one that you might end up doing is regression. And so exploring the relationships between the variables, but also getting at how to make predictions, that's going to fall under regression. So I already mentioned about transforming variables. You know how to do that. All of that's coming up the transform variable. We did recode into different variables. Again, save your work, save your work, save your work. Now that I've created this new variable, I might create other new variables. Don't just save, but save it as a new file. So you always have your basic, your original data file as it is before you added on other things. And again, when you're saving it, it's going to be a .sav file that you can reopen later, that you can share, work with others on. All right, any last questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any or hearing any, so thank you for your time today. Again, you're going to get an email after this with all the slides that has a lot more detail about the things we did today and even some things that we didn't have time to get to. It's also going to share resources with you, some links in those slides where you can get additional resources for sample files or SPSS help or tutorials, and then also a evaluation survey for our time here today. So thank you for being here. And if you have additional questions, I will put my email address in the chat. It's mturner4@fsu.edu. And I am your social science data and research librarian if you have additional questions or needs. So thank you.